The classic Western, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, a book that has been talked about ad nauseum here on YouTube and elsewhere. So what do I have to say about it that you haven't heard already? I'm not sure, but I'm hopefully going to be able to illuminate some things that other reviewers or other people who are discussing this novel have not yet done. And much like this book is about the past coming back to influence the present, that was my own personal journey regarding this book. So I think it's important to talk about that because I am of the philosophy, and I don't think this is a hot take, I don't think it's interesting or thought-provoking really, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that I think that we're only ready for certain books at certain times. Even if we have seen it before on a shelf, a friend has talked about it, et cetera, et cetera. The first one for me was House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. I got it as a Christmas gift when I was 20, didn't read it till I was 40, so a full 20 years. Another book was Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Back when I worked at Barnes & Noble, I saw it on the shelves often. I was captivated by the cover. Did not read it till I was 28 or so. So it's taken me some time, and granted, I have appreciated those novels so much when I read them. They're two of my favorite novels of all time. But I don't think I was ready, right? I don't think I was ready when I first saw them. Sometimes books are just like that. And speaking of books that are just like that, Lonesome Dove, I first discovered it, or actually was introduced to it, by a friend of mine named Joel, who I worked with way back at Barnes & Noble in the year, it's probably about 2000 or so. Anyway, he would often read books on his break, and I'll never forget him kind of shuffling out with glee with this very dense mass market paperback in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and he'd sit in front of the store and just devour this book and consistently tell me how much he was enjoying it. But zoom forward 25 years, and a friend of mine, a new friend of mine named Britton, known as Some Okie Dude here on YouTube, he made a video. And in that video, he was recommending books to certain YouTubers. And the book that he chose for me was, you guessed it, Lonesome Dove. So I told myself, you know what? I'm going to read this damn thing already. It's been too long. So here I am to give you my thoughts. Hopefully it's worth your time. Sorry for the long preamble, but I think it was necessary. So let us get into this review. I know many of you who are watching this video have probably already read the book and just want to get my opinion on it, but this, and hopefully you'll get something out of this as well, but of course it's going to be spoiler free. But this video is really intended for people who have not read it yet, because this book requires a certain mindset to get into, a mindset that I was not warned of, that I was not prepared for until at least a few hundred pages into this book. So right out of the gates, I want you, dear reader, dear future reader, hopefully, because I really want to convince you to read this book, understand that this is a very deliberately paced novel. It's very slow. It takes its time. I went in blind to this novel. I didn't know anything about it other than it was a Western. So I'm going to keep the synopsis very, very sparse, because I feel like the less you know about this book, except one minor thing, which I'm going to get into very shortly, the better. It takes place in Texas in the mid-1870s, and it centers around a small town called Lonesome Dove. And we're introduced to a man named Gus, who is an ex-Texas Ranger. And along with his partner in crime, Woodward Call, they own the Hat Creek Cattle Company. So they're just running cattle, whiling the hours away doing that, as well as playing cards, drinking a lot, and of course, a little bit of whoring, because what would a Western be without some whoring? But that is all I want you to know about the plot, okay? I will talk about structurally and how engaging the plot is, but in a very general sense. But let us begin with the glue that holds this entire thing together, because despite the book being deliberately paced, despite it being pushing 1,000 pages, this is what matters. This is what clearly matters to Larry McMurtry, as well as the story itself. And I'm not going to go through every single character because it is a very large cast. But in short, it kind of feels like a dysfunctional family. You have like the figurehead, who might be Gus, with his partner in crime, as I mentioned, Call. Then there's a handsome hotshot named Jake Spoon, who they used to work with in the past, and he falls in love with the single prostitute, and Lorena, and I think this is probably when my metaphor falls apart, or becomes very disturbing. So I'll cut it with a family thing, but they have this sense of community, friendship, camaraderie, but they also have their differences. The strongest thing I found about the characterization in this book is that Not a single character feels like the hero. They all feel like a hero of their own stories. They all have their own dreams, their desires, their hopes, their fears, their flaws. So while we often read a book and it feels like the secondary characters, let's call them, feel like they exist to support the protagonist or protagonists, it doesn't feel like that here. It almost feels like you could move the camera to any one of these individuals and write a novel about them. And I feel like that's something that writers often forget, because we as readers, and I can only assume writers as well, are looking for that focal point. They're looking for the person to center the story around, and often forget how important the supporting cast is. But there's also a Mexican bandit who is now the chef. There's a guy with a hole in his stomach who plays the piano, as he likes to call it. There's a young boy who is a little bit unsure of who his father really is. And of course, as I mentioned, there's Lorena the prostitute, a young, beautiful woman who is, let's say, shared among the men and breeds much envy. And her being really the central female character in this book, it's not unlike, and I'm sure you guys out there have had a job where it's all dudes. It's a sausage party, pretty much. And one woman gets hired, and all of a sudden she is the centerpiece. She takes center stage. She garners all of the attention. That's very much how Lorena is in this book. But she is not just a pretty face. She is not just a damsel in distress. She has her own hopes and dreams, as I mentioned. But there are other women in this novel too. Some devious, some strong, some hilarious. But I will leave those for you to discover on your own. But if I had to pick a favorite character of this bunch, it would probably be Dietz, who, in a fantastic scene that's incredibly memorable in this book, where he realizes his first name. They all call him Dietz for a long time. He doesn't recall his first name. And then finally, randomly, he does, and it's Joshua. He's an ex-slave. He's a very even-keeled character where you're constantly wondering what's going on behind his eyes, because he has a sense of duty. He has a sense of loyalty. He's so emotionally stable that he's really a mystery. But he's also kind of childlike in a lot of ways. He has this innocent feeling to him, a very matter-of-fact way as well. Someone who has seen hardships, knows the way of the world, and you know there's just so much wisdom behind his eyes. Hopefully I've given you enough to want to hang out with these people where nothing really goes on for over 200 pages, because that's exactly what you're going to find here. Now, technically speaking, if this book is pushing 1,000 pages and over 200 pages is more or less the 25% mark, if you want to be a story nerd like me, that's technically where Act 1 would end. So even though this novel feels like it drags for 200-ish pages, it makes sense structurally. It's pretty much just them farting around Lonesome Dove, like I said, drinking, playing cards, whoring, learning about who these characters are in a very safe setting. And that brings me to my realization of the genius of the structure, is that Larry McMurtry, I feel like, is fooling us in a way. He's putting us in the shoes of the character because they're comfortable. Granted, there's not much going on in Lonesome Dove, and it's kind of a dying town, but it's safe, more or less. And so they come and do the same things day in and day out. But they also, some of them anyway, have a sense of adventure, just like we do as the reader, right? We're always wanting the story to push forward. So we're reading this book and we're like, God damn it, when is this thing going to move forward? And then it finally does, when they decide to take the cattle all the way up to Montana. And some of these characters go along, some stay behind, but there's this moment of uncertainty. Whereas us as the readers are very excited to see some action happen, so to speak. This is about their real lives on the line. And Gus, he is constantly reminding them as well as us that they will not all make it. And just like them, we have a sense of invulnerability. It's never going to happen to us. It's never going to happen to them. We know how stories are structured. We know how characters are structured, and that we think we can guess who will live and who will die. That is another genius part in this book, because just like George R. R. Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire, he subverted those tropes that when you have a protagonist, in quotes, he or she will not die because he or she is the one who is pushing the story forward. So you can kind of think that Gus or Woodrow or even someone like Jake might be the protagonist based on traditional story values, but that's not the case. They all share the stage, as I mentioned previously. It's a very shared narrative, but still, we are clinging to traditional storytelling and the way that a cast of characters is assembled. And McMurtry, he exploits this beautifully by surprising us, let's say, without spoiling things, regarding the safety and well-being of the characters in this book. So I really appreciated that fact where it felt like a clever, underhanded way of educating the reader and the ignorant characters in the book simultaneously about what this world is like, what living in this time was like, which brings me to exactly that. One thing I learned from reading this novel is a lot of these characters view relationships as utility. So many of these characters in this book, they may have been married multiple times, their wives may have died, they may have children that have died. And while of course they mourn, and while of course they're heartbroken, they move on. They pick up and they move on. They were made of stronger stuff back then, if there's any authenticity to how McMurtry portrayed these characters. Because now in our comfortable societies, at least some of the world anyway, we've lost that kind of sense. When someone close to us dies, it's devastating, it's life-shattering, it's earth-shattering, it's an event that a lot of people take a really long time to get over or sometimes never get over. You will see the counter to that in this book and how even though these characters have a long history with each other, they understand that you must move on, that you have to move on, that you just keep going, no matter what befalls you or someone you deeply care about. And there's one scene in the book it's a pretty funny version of what I'm talking about, and I'm not going to spoil the entire thing for you, but it's with a character named Roscoe. He's off searching for somebody, let's say. He runs into this woman in the woods who's living off the land. And they start having a conversation. She, of course, informs him that, she's lost like 2 or 3 husbands, and then sizes him up and asks him if he would like to be her husband. So it's almost like a business transaction. She sees some value in him, how he could be useful to her, how they could be mutually beneficial to each other. And it's hilarious because we often don't think, at least hopefully you guys don't out there think of relationships as a business transaction or purely for utility. But this entire concept gave me pause and gave me a deeper appreciation for this novel. Also, regarding the plot, it's kind of Tolkien-esque in a way. It has kind of a there and back again feel, so to speak, where there's a large group of people heading off on a grand adventure. Granted, there's no Dark Lord, there's no evil that is threatening the entire world and they must go vanquish it. But I constantly got the feeling of The Lord of the Rings, where you have a group of people that are supporting each other, risking their lives for one another, and developing these very strong ties. Not only that, they all have a history together, most of them anyway. So they're taking that history and strengthening or weakening those bonds along the road to Montana. But the antagonist primarily in the story is the environment itself. However, you could say there is one antagonistic force who is a person. He shows up later in the novel, and while he is a formidable foe, he feels kind of like a plot B. And again, I think that's the beauty of the story. It's not about these characters being in certain places meticulously plotted. It's just this guy was there at that time, and that's the only reason he's affecting these characters at all. But while he was kind of a scary dude, he doesn't come close to Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. But how do the words paint the pages of this book? What is the cinematography of the novel or the writing itself? Well, it's omniscient, third person. It's got a little southerly twang to it, so it feels very fitting. There's some phonetic spelling, but it's not overly done, because I know a lot of times when writers try to make things too phonetic, it's difficult to read. It's not like that here at all. We float from POV to POV, sometimes within the same chapter. But just like the people who inhabit this story, it's about utility. I don't feel like this writing is doing anything special. It's not doing anything terrible. It's completely fine. You're not going to find anything here like the poetic philosophizing of Cormac McCarthy, or something with a strong narrative voice like Tom's Crossing by Mark Danielewski, which I'm reading right now. But that's okay. I think I'm okay with that because the cast is so colorful. There's so much of a tangled web of interactions and dynamics with the characters that I can understand why McMurtry wanted to not make the prose itself a character, which is why I'm going to give Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry a 9 out of 10. A Western with a dynamic and rich cast of characters. Some you'll grow to love, some you'll grow to hate, but each and every one of them has hopes and desires and could be the heroes in their own stories. With a plot that meanders for a good quarter of the novel, but it's worth the marination. With writing that isn't trying to do anything fancy, just doing what needs doing, and that's okay with me. Well, that is the end of the review/discussion of Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, but let us not end the conversation here. Let's continue it down in the comments below. I would love to hear if you've read it. I would love to hear your story about how you discovered the novel and when you decided to read it. And if you haven't read it, why haven't you decided to read it yet if you know about it? This was a great novel. I'm so glad that I finally got to it, and I plan to read the rest of the series at some point in time. I already have the second book, and that's probably another thing I should have mentioned earlier, is that the publication date of these books, so Lonesome Dove being book 1, the story doesn't follow that chronologically. So I believe Lonesome Dove happens later, and then the later novels kind of jump back to before. Kind of a strange way to structure a novel, so if you have any insight into that, let me know down in the comments below. And thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.